On the first questions on climate actions, the government of Nepal will continue to implement its policies and climate ambitions based on international agreements and national legislation, and ADB will stand ready to work with the government and support government policy. Secondly, on the tariff implications for Nepal, I think there is a lot to say. So I will just say something very little, and then Manbar, who has done a thorough analysis, can also fill in. Maybe the overall trade policies will have a very substantial impact on the global economy, and according to our estimations, growth in the Asia and Pacific region will be lower by about 1/3 of a percentage point this year, and I believe about 1% percentage point of next year. There is some in-depth analysis in our report, and I would say as a second round effect that this will have a short-term impact on the Nepali economy in terms of demand, maybe coming from tourism, but also demand for other sectors. Secondly, as you mentioned, the tariff increase for Nepal is comparatively small to other neighboring countries and also to Southeast Asia. But we should also be a bit careful that we have first round impacts on short-term economic growth. As I mentioned earlier, it also takes time to build production facilities to respond to maybe a change in the price structure in those sectors which you have mentioned, textile and apparel, for example. And generally also it will require a response from the supply side, and for that the critical structural factors are the business climate, where the government has done some substantial improvements over the last half year or year, and other factors which will be important is FDI as part of it, also skills development and infrastructure development. So these responses from the supply side will eventually need to be expansionary in order to have a positive reaction from the supply side to that change in the relative structure which you mentioned. But I think you made an important point here, certainly, which based on that, the tariff increase for Nepal is substantially lower. But eventually we need to have an expansionary feedback from the supply side, and we also have impacts on the short-term business cycle in Asia and the Pacific. There is one important change, or maybe even a game changer, or a change in the factors of production already happening and increasingly working over the medium to long term, which is the build-up of electricity generation and transmission, which will enable the industry to benefit from inexpensive and abundant and inexpensive green energy. And that will be a very important change in the factors of production and increase the business opportunities in industry, and it has already done, according to the survey, the number of companies which now see challenges in the electricity supply is much lower than it was 5 or 10 years ago. So this change is already happening, and the access to energy is one of the most important factors for export companies, and this is also an opportunity for the medium-term development of tourism to focus on the international trend of environmentally sustainable and green tourism. So also that is a huge opportunity for the country for the medium term. Well, what we are talking, or you are basically responding to a supply shock, a one-off supply shock to inflation rather than a demand shock, which equally is increasing inflationary pressure over the short term, but not necessarily over the long term. It might even be the opposite because of the estimated impact of the tariff increases on the business cycle and aggregated demand, that despite a supply shock coming from increasing tariffs, the demand part of inflation will go down, and that we face lower inflationary pressures over the short to medium term. But in any case, as you know, the reaction of central banks to supply shocks is not that straightforward as it is to demand shocks. In that case, I would be a little bit careful to basically assume higher inflationary pressures in the short or medium term. Strong drivers of economic growth, beside remittances, which is the increase in electricity generation and transmission, and that, as Manbar explained, is already a major driving force for the short-term economic outlook, and it may be so increasingly, and then spillover effects on manufacturing. Also, IT services have been booming, and there is huge potential in tourism. So there are a lot of opportunities coming up for Nepal's economy as well, and the government has done very substantial reforms, more recently on the business climate. And ADB and the World Bank, we will also focus to help the government on further improving the business climate over the next year. We have some very strong interventions in our country programs. Very low cost international development finance from the international development banks and the development partners, and the large share of it in the debt stock, of course, is the explanation why the current risk of debt distress is low. But this would also require a better execution of the investment budget and more effective management, project cycle management for investments, public investments, to be able to utilize that very cheap development finance which is largely available.
For Nepalese migrant workers, and particularly the remittance that Nepal relies on very heavily. So, we have been working on the country diagnostic study, and then the World Bank has also done the country economic memorandum. So what Nepal is lacking at the moment, not at the moment, it has lacked for years, decades, the structural transformation, right? So what we see is that there has been a typical transformation from agriculture to services, skipping the industrial, which is the key sector and labor-intensive sector that will provide massive employment to semi-skilled and even skilled labor force in Nepal. So that is lacking, and that is where our policies should be targeted at. Now, there has been recent amendment to the key acts: Foreign Investment Act, Special Economic Zone Act, Company Act, endorsed by the Parliament. Now we need to see its effective implementation so as to materialize what Nepal needs at the moment, at this crucial juncture. So jobs creation is very crucial. In that case, like, why are youth leaving the country? It's because of lack of opportunities here within the home, right? So that could be created. Now, what we see lots of barren land if we go outside, if we go to the countryside. Why, right? So, and so Nepal has competitive edge in the production of so many niche agriculture produce. The Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies have come up with the Nepal Trade Integration Strategy. Very recently, I think Janardhan ji and everyone knows about it. It has listed so many items ranging from Pasmina, honey, tea, coffee, IT sector. It has also prepared the SWOT analysis where the strength, weaknesses, opportunities and threats lie. Now is the time to actually implement these prioritized programs and projects in a coordinated and a sequential manner. So that will address the issue of jobs within the country. Okay, now, coming to the reciprocal tariff. So US basically imposed a duty of 0 to 10% on Nepalese goods that have been exported to the United States. And these goods are largely unique to Nepal, like fabrics made of animal fur, dog chew, animal feet, right? And then the carpets, and also textile. So basically, the fabrics made of animal fur, dog chew, these are very unique Nepali products, in which Nepal may not have a close competitor. Plus, Nepal was not in a position to meet the demand of these products in the past. So we don't see a great effect, a very, like a negative effect because of this increased tariff in the tariff because it's a base tariff of 10%, and Nepal, so if you recall, the garment sector was one of the top exporting sector of Nepal a few years back. Now, with the phase out of the multi-fiber agreement, in which Nepal enjoyed duty-free access, under that agreement, the garment sector basically collapsed. So what we saw is that there was foreign investment in the garment sector as well, right? So now is the time, like with 10% tariff imposed on Nepal's TNC sector, and if you see the tariff imposed on the TNC sector of other competitor countries, it's pretty low. So Nepal has a competitive edge if it could capitalize on this, but then it has to address other key issues like the business environment, the institutional setup, the bureaucratic hassles. Otherwise, without addressing the business climate environment, foreign investors aren't going to set up or aren't going to, the existing TNC sector aren't going to expand their business operations. So those critical issues need to be addressed. The institutional hurdles, the bureaucratic hurdles, and also the favorable environment that's being addressed by the recently announced ordinance. It has to be effectively implemented. So Nepal needs to give a clear message that it has amended its business environment. Now is the time for foreign investors to actually invest more, and also for the existing businessmen to expand their operations. So that way Nepal could actually enhance its export base. Now coming to the tourism. See, like in Nepal, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a rapid decline in international tourist arrivals, right? But then with the opening up after COVID-19, with the waning of COVID-19 effect, there has been a surge in international tourist arrivals, and that's the figure from the Department of Immigration. So we see that it has actually reached or even exceeded the pre-pandemic level. And What we also see is that there has been a surge in the establishment and the construction of 5-star to 3-star hotels across the country, not just within the Kathmandu. And we also see an increased credit lent to the tourism sector, particularly hotels and other adventure tourism sectors alike. So there has been a surge in international tourist arrivals that has supported further investment in the tourism sector. And also, if you see the foreign investment, it's largely in tourism and hydropower. So, but you are right, if you ask the Hotel Association of Nepal, there has been lower occupancy. And this is because, with increased hotels, with increased rooms, the occupancy gets distributed. But then, with the recent weather in Nepal that has been persisting for a week long, so this is not an amenable environment to attract tourists. But again, you are right, So, and not just the international tourist arrivals, we also have to look the appetite within the country for people to travel outside Kathmandu, outside home, traveling, going outside Kathmandu. There has been a surge, right? So it's usually, it was the notion that basically international foreigners will visit Nepal and that's it, and that's how the hotels will be financed, will be run, operated. But there has been a paradigm shift. Now Nepalis are going outside, visiting places, eating outside, not within, so that has been a trend. And consumption, so again, the consumption pattern. Now, this is again backed by the data published by the Central Bank of Nepal and also by the National Statistics Office. They have already come up with the second quarter data. So what we see is that consumption is on a rise, and that is also supported by the expansion in wholesale and retail trade data, also supported by increased digital payment, increased expansion of food and accommodation, transportation. So it's backed by data. But then there's always a downside risk which we should always be wary of. The Ministry of Finance has to apportion higher and higher amount for debt financing. So, but we also have to see, like where the debt is going. So if it is, so the debt that is set aside for income generating projects, for infrastructure projects that will have good returns, jobs creation, right? So in a nutshell, I don't see any immediate effect. It's manageable. No, the growth forecast of about 4.4% this fiscal year and 5.1% is backed by the data, the existing data and the existing scenario going forward. Now, what you have highlighted is the downside risks to outlook. So those are the potential risks which will dampen the growth prospect. If those features prominently, then yes, it will have a negative effect on growth. That was what I was mentioning over there. Now, foreign aid, Nepal used to receive huge amount of foreign aid. Foreign aid means this is not concessional lending. It has been decreasing lately. What the government projects is not what it receives. So there has been a decline. But then the greater challenge, as Ian mentioned, is also about the efficient utilization of capital budget, and that is largely financed by external sources, particularly the multilaterals, the absorption. So that is the key to drive growth forward. So Nepal is always at risk of this environmental hazards. We all know, So it's a fragile country. So that has to be always taken into account when projecting growth forecast.